Growing up, I always knew Mia was special. My parents never shied away from reminding me. She was their miracle baby, born after years of trying and the heartbreak of a miscarriage that left my mother devastated. I was 5 when Mia came along, and I was too young to understand the weight of what her birth meant to them. All I knew was that my baby sister was here, and everyone seemed to be smiling more because of it. At first, I loved her the way any older sibling would. I'd rush to her crib every morning to watch her sleep, fascinated by her tiny hands and the way she cooed at me. I gave her my favorite stuffed animals, let her tug at my hair, and took pride in the way she'd giggle whenever I made a funny face. My parents, over the moon with joy, were quick to point out how amazing I was as a big sister. But as Mia grew older, things started to change. The bond one thought we had began to feel one-sided. Mia learned quickly that she could charm her way into getting what she wanted, and it wasn't long before she realized she could shift blame onto me if things didn't go her way. At first, it was little things, spilling juice on the carpet and saying I'd done it, or hiding toys she'd broken so I'd take the fall. My parents would scold me, telling me to be more careful or set a better example. I thought it was just a phase. I thought she'd grow out of it. She didn't. Instead, Mia's manipulative streak became sharper, more calculated. Once, when I was about 8 and she was 3, she put a spider in my bed. I woke up to it crawling on my arm and screamed so loudly the entire house rushed into my room. Mia stood in the doorway, wide-eyed and pretending to be scared, while I hyperventilated under the covers. Later, I confronted her about it, and she smirked. "It was just a joke," she said, as if that excused everything. The worst part wasn't even the spider, it was how my parents reacted. When I told them Mia had done it on purpose, they brushed it off. "She's just a kid," my mom said, laughing like it was adorable. "She probably didn't even know it would scare you." My dad joined in, adding, "You've got to have thicker skin. She looks up to you, you know." But Mia wasn't just a mischievous child. She thrived on the attention her antics brought her, and she knew exactly how to turn on the waterworks when she got caught. Every time I tried to expose her behavior, she'd cry and act like the victim. My parents, of course, always took her side. "She didn't mean it," they'd say, or worse, "Why are you being so hard on her? You're supposed to be the mature one." By the time I was a teenager, I'd stopped trying to explain Mia's behavior. There was no point. She could get away with anything, and I was always the one left picking up the pieces. My parents didn't see it, or maybe they didn't want to. To them, Mia could do no wrong. She was their golden child, their miracle baby, the daughter who could light up any room with her smile. And me? I was the shadow standing beside her, always falling short of their expectations. I remember one Christmas when I was 13 and Mia was 8. I'd saved up for months to buy her a doll she'd been begging for, a limited edition one that was nearly impossible to find. When she opened it, she squealed with delight and hugged me, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe things were changing. But later that day, she accidentally spilled hot cocoa all over my new sweater, the one my grandmother had knitted for me. When I got upset, she burst into tears, claiming it was an accident. My parents rushed to comfort her, barely sparing me a glance, as they told me not to make such a big deal out of it. Incidents like that became the norm. Mia's ability to play the victim was almost impressive, and I felt more and more isolated as my parents fell for it every time. They chalked up her behavior to innocent mischief, while I was labeled the overly sensitive older sibling who couldn't take a joke. I started to feel like an outsider in my own family, a guest in a home where Mia was the star, and I was just an afterthought. Looking back, I don't think my parents meant to hurt me. They were blinded by their love for Mia, by the miracle of her existence after so much loss. But their favoritism left a mark on me that I carried for years, a constant reminder that in their eyes, Mia could do no wrong, and I would never be enough. By the time I reached high school, I had learned to expect Mia's antics. She'd honed her talent for sabotage, and no opportunity to undermine me was too small or too petty. It was as if my parents' endless praise fueled her, giving her a confidence I could never hope to match. I tried to rise above it, to brush off her behavior, and not let it bother me. But no matter how much I told myself she couldn't get to me, she always found a way to cut deeper than the time before. One of the worst incidents happened when I was a sophomore. I'd been crushing on a boy in my class for months, Mark, a sweet, slightly awkward guy who always helped me with chemistry homework. I told my best friend about my feelings, whispering excitedly about how I thought he might like me too. Mia, eavesdropping as usual, took that information and turned it into a weapon. A week later, I came home to find Mark sitting in our living room. Mia had invited him over, claiming she needed help with her homework. I was confused but hopeful at first. Maybe she was actually trying to do something nice for once. But then, as I passed by, I heard her giggle and say, "Did you know my sister still sleeps with her old baby blanket? Isn't that hilarious?" I froze. It wasn't true. I hadn't touched that blanket in years, but the damage was done. Mark looked at me, half smiling but clearly uncomfortable. That's cute, I guess," he said awkwardly, clearly trying to be polite. I mumbled something about needing to study and fled to my room, my face burning with humiliation. Later, when I confronted Mia, she didn't even try to deny what she'd done. Instead, she gave me that infuriating smirk she always wore when she knew she'd gotten away with something. "Relax," she said, her voice dripping with fake innocence. "It was just a joke. You need to lighten up." When I told my parents, hoping they'd finally see Mia for what she was, they barely paid attention. "She didn't mean any harm," Mom said dismissively. "You're too sensitive. She's just trying to bond with you in her own way." Dad chimed in with a similar line, saying, "Don't let it bother you. You know Mia's just being playful." It wasn't playful. It was calculated, and it worked. Mia had managed to humiliate me in front of my crush, and my parents had once again brushed it under the rug. I stopped talking about Mark after that. Mia had stolen yet another moment from me, and I knew there was no point in trying to explain how much it hurt. This pattern didn't stop as we got older. In fact, it seemed to intensify. While I struggled to navigate the challenges of adulthood, working part-time jobs, juggling college classes, and trying to figure out who I wanted to be, Mia breezed through life like it was handed to her on a silver platter. My parents paid for everything: her tuition, her car, even her weekend spending money. Meanwhile, I had to scrape together every penny for rent and textbooks. Whenever I dared to point out the disparity, they always had an excuse. "Mia needs a little extra help right now," Mom would say. Or, "You're so independent. You've always been the strong one. She's not like you." At first, I tried to convince myself they were right. I was independent. I didn't need their help the way Mia did. But deep down, I resented it. I resented that my parents didn't see how much I was struggling, that they never once offered to lighten my load. And I resented Mia for taking it all for granted. While I was drowning, she was floating through life without a care in the world. It was around that time that I started to emotionally distance myself from my family. I still came home for holidays and smiled through dinner conversations, but it felt hollow. I was tired of being the invisible daughter, the one who was always expected to understand and forgive. And I was tired of Mia's smirks, her constant reminders that she could do whatever she wanted and still come out on top. By the time I graduated college, I had stopped asking for their approval. I didn't expect them to notice my accomplishments, and I didn't bother sharing my struggles. I focused on building my own life, one where Mia's shadow couldn't reach me. But no matter how far I tried to run, the sting of their favoritism followed me, a constant reminder of everything I'd lost. My father's heart attack was a wake-up call for all of us. For a man who had always seemed invincible, seeing him hooked up to monitors, frail and pale, was terrifying. He survived, but the experience left him shaken. "We've been wasting too much time," he said during one of our family dinners a few weeks later, his voice heavy with emotion. "Life's too short. We need to spend more of it together." That's how the idea of a family vacation came about. Dad suggested a week-long trip to a picturesque coastal town where we could relax, reconnect, and make some happy memories. "No distractions," he insisted. "Just us." I was hesitant. The thought of being stuck with Mia for a week was less than appealing. But Dad seemed so hopeful, and for once, it felt like he was trying to include me, not just Mia. So I agreed, cautiously optimistic that maybe things could be different this time. We spent weeks planning the trip. My mom was thrilled, going over itineraries and beach rentals with the enthusiasm of someone who desperately needed a break. Mia, of course, made everything about her, insisting she needed a private room with the best view and vetoing restaurants she didn't like. I bit my tongue and focused on Dad's excitement. This was for him, I told myself. I could handle a week of Mia's antics for his sake. On the morning of the trip, we arrived at the airport with plenty of time to spare. I was actually feeling a spark of excitement, imagining long walks on the beach and maybe even a chance to bond with my family. But that spark was quickly extinguished. When I handed my ticket to the attendant, she frowned and looked at her screen. "I'm sorry," she said. "This ticket has been canceled." "Canceled?" I repeated, confused. That can't be right. I pulled out my phone and opened the confirmation email, showing her the proof. She looked again and shook her head. I'm sorry, but it's no longer valid. You'll need to contact the airline. Panic bubbled in my chest. Behind me, my parents were busy checking their own tickets, oblivious to the commotion. But one person wasn't oblivious, Mia. She stood a few feet away, leaning casually against her carry-on, a smug smile playing on her lips. She didn't say a word, but her expression told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't an airline error. This was her. I turned to my parents, desperate for help. Mom, Dad, my ticket's been canceled. The airline says it's not valid. What? Mom said, frowning. That doesn't make sense. You confirmed everything, didn't you? Yes, I did. I said, my voice trembling. Someone must have canceled it. Mia, I turned to her, unable to hide my frustration. Did you do this? Mia gasped, putting on her best performance of wounded innocence. What are you talking about? Why would I do that? Because it's exactly the kind of thing you do. I shot back. Look at her face, Mom. She's smirking. She knows something. Mom shook her head, exasperated. Oh, stop it. Mia wouldn't do something like that. It's probably just a mix-up with the airline. These things happen. Exactly, Mia chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. Don't blame me just because you didn't double-check your ticket. My dad, clearly tired and stressed, sighed. Let's not turn this into a big thing. We're on a tight schedule. Just go home and sort it out later, okay? Go home, I repeated, my voice breaking. You're just going to leave without me? Dad rubbed his temples, clearly not in the mood for a fight. We've already checked in, and it's too late to fix this now. We'll figure it out when we get back. I looked at him, at Mom, at Mia's smug face, and realized there was no point in arguing. They weren't going to believe me, no matter how obvious it was. Fine, I said, my voice hollow. Have a great trip. I turned and walked away, fighting back tears as I left the airport. Once again, Mia had managed to ruin something important to me, and my parents had let her. But this time felt worse than all the others. This wasn't just a prank or a petty act of sabotage. This was exclusion. My family had chosen to leave me behind, and there was no coming back from that. I tried everything to make them see. Standing there in the chaos of the airport, my voice shaking with frustration, I begged my parents to listen. This isn't an airline error, I said, gesturing wildly toward Mia, who was pretending to fiddle with her phone. She did this. Look at her face. She's practically gloating. My mom sighed, already exhausted from the trip that hadn't even started. Don't be ridiculous, she said, brushing off my words like they were nothing more than the tantrums of a jealous child. Why would Mia do something like that? What could she possibly gain from canceling your ticket? Seriously, Mia chimed in, her voice dripping with faux indignation. I didn't do anything. Why would you even accuse me of that? Maybe it's a glitch or something. Her wide-eyed innocence was convincing. I'll give her that. She was an expert at this game, and she knew exactly how to play it. My dad, who looked like he was one minor inconvenience away from a meltdown, waved his hand dismissively. We don't have time for this. Just go home, and we'll sort it out later. We're about to miss our flight. Go home. The words hit me like a slap. They weren't even willing to miss their flight to help me fix this. My anger mixed with a familiar sadness, the kind that comes from years of being dismissed and overlooked. You're just going to leave without me? Asked, my voice trembling. We don't have a choice, my mom said, exasperated. We'll figure it out when we're back, I promise. They left. I watched them walk through security with their bags, my mom patting Mia on the back as if to reassure her after the trauma of being accused. She glanced back once, catching my eye, and smiled, a small, triumphant curl of her lips that made my blood boil. That smirk haunted me the entire way back to my apartment. I spent the rest of the day stewing. It wasn't just the trip I was upset about, it was everything the situation represented. My parents' refusal to believe me, their willingness to side with Mia despite years of evidence to the contrary, and the way they dismissed my feelings as if they were insignificant. This wasn't just about a canceled ticket, it was about a lifetime of being the scapegoat, the one who never mattered as much. The longer I sat in my apartment, the angrier I became. I thought about all the times Mia had pulled stunts like this before, all the little ways she'd humiliated me or sabotaged me, knowing my parents would always defend her. I'd tried to let it go for years, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight, but this time felt different. This time, it wasn't just my pride that was hurt, it was my sense of belonging in my own family. That night, I checked social media, knowing it was a mistake. My parents had already started posting photos of their trip. There they were, smiling on the plane, and later, posing by the beach with the sunset behind them. Family time, my mom had captioned one photo. Family. The word stung, a reminder that I wasn't part of it. I scrolled further, my stomach tightening with every photo. There was Mia, holding a fruity cocktail, her arm draped over my dad's shoulder, as if she were the perfect daughter. There was my mom, looking relaxed and happy in a way she never seemed around me. And then there was a group shot, the three of them laughing together, with a caption, "Making memories we'll treasure forever." I slammed my phone down, unable to look anymore. For years, I told myself I didn't care about my parents' favoritism, that I'd outgrown the need for their approval. But seeing those pictures, knowing they'd left me behind without a second thought, broke something in me. I wasn't just the outsider. I was invisible. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the moment at the airport, the way my dad had waved me off, as if I were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. I thought about Mia's smirk, my mom's indifference, and the way my parents had refused to even consider the possibility that Mia was at fault. The truth was clear. I'd never been their priority. And maybe I never would be. I barely heard from my parents while they were on their trip. A few vague texts here and there, mostly updates about the weather or the hotel's breakfast buffet. Not a single apology for leaving me behind. I tried not to dwell on it, but every new photo Mia posted to social media was like a slap in the face. Pictures of her kayaking with dad, dining at waterfront restaurants, or lounging by the pool with mom. Making the most of our family time, one caption read. Family. The word stung every time. When they got back, I noticed something was off. Mom called me that evening, her voice unusually tense. "We're home," she said flatly. I waited for her to follow up with something about the trip, but instead, there was a long pause. Then she said, "We need to talk about Mia." I froze. Those were words I'd been waiting to hear for years, but they didn't carry the tone of vindication I'd imagined. "What about Mia?" I asked cautiously, bracing myself. "She's been behaving strangely," Mom said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your dad wasn't feeling well on the trip, and we couldn't figure out why. We thought maybe it was the travel or his diet, but it didn't add up. Then we found," she trailed off, struggling to continue. "What did you find?" I pressed, my chest tightening. "We found his heart medication in Mia's bag," she admitted finally, her voice trembling. "We confronted her about it, and she said it was a mistake, that she packed it by accident." But her words faltered, leaving an uncomfortable silence hanging between us. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what she'd just said. Mia had stolen Dad's heart medication? The pills he needed to keep his heart functioning after the attack? Her antics had always been cruel, manipulative comments, petty pranks, lies to turn my parents against me, but this was something else entirely. Why would she take them? I asked, my voice shaking with both anger and disbelief. "She wouldn't say," Mom replied, her voice cracking. "She just kept insisting it was an accident. But the way she reacted when we found them, it didn't feel like an accident." I could hear the pain in her voice, the slow realization that Mia might not be the perfect golden child they'd always believed she was. For a moment, I felt vindicated. Finally, they were seeing the side of Mia I'd been trying to show them for years. But the satisfaction was fleeting, quickly replaced by sadness. This wasn't just about my parents recognizing her true colors. It was about the fact that things had gotten so bad in the first place. How had we ended up here? With a family so fractured that this level of betrayal was even possible? Mom kept talking, her words a mix of guilt and denial. She said she was trying to help. She explained, though it was clear she didn't believe it, that she thought he didn't need them anymore. But why would she even touch them? Why would she go through his things? "She's lying," I said bluntly, cutting through Mom's excuses. "You know she's lying." Mom didn't respond right away. "We don't know that for sure," she said weakly. "But something isn't right. Your dad doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't know what to think." Her hesitation infuriated me. Even now, after everything, they were still giving Mia the benefit of the doubt. "She could have seriously hurt him," I said, my voice rising. "Do you understand that? This isn't a prank or a joke. This is dangerous." "I know," Mom whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know what to do anymore. I wanted to feel angry at her, at both of them, but all I felt was exhaustion. For years, They turned a blind eye to Mia's behavior, enabling her at every turn. And now, finally faced with the consequences, they were scrambling to make sense of it. Part of me wanted to scream, "I told you so." But what would be the point? The damage was already done. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and replaying Mom's words over and over. Mia had crossed a line I didn't even think she was capable of crossing, and the fallout was just beginning. I couldn't shake the nagging question that had been circling my mind all evening. Was this rock bottom for my family, or was it just the beginning of the end? After the discovery of Dad's heart medication in Mia's bag, the cracks in our family dynamic widened quickly. My parents, once so steadfast in their defense of Mia, began to question her actions. But instead of confronting the situation directly, they tiptoed around it, as if speaking it aloud would make it real. Mia, for her part, seemed unbothered. If anything, she leaned harder into her defiance, brushing off their concerns with sarcasm and her trademark smugness. The tension came to a head during one particularly heated dinner. Dad had asked Mia about the medication again, his voice tinged with frustration and worry. "You need to tell us the truth, Mia. Why did you take them?" Mia rolled her eyes and stabbed at her salad with a fork. "I told you already, it was a mistake. I don't know why you keep bringing it up." "It wasn't a mistake," Dad snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "This isn't some little prank, Mia. You could have hurt me. What were you thinking?" Mia's expression hardened, her usual feigned innocence replaced with cold anger. "You're acting like I'm some kind of criminal," she spat. "I'm so tired of this. You're supposed to be my family, not my enemies. You're the one making us feel this way." Mom interjected, her voice trembling. "We don't even know who you are anymore." That was the breaking point. Mia stood abruptly, knocking over her chair. "You've always been against me," she shouted, glaring at them. "You're just like her." She gestured vaguely in the direction of my name, though I wasn't there. "I'm done with this." She grabbed her bag and stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard the walls seemed to shake. Hours passed with no word from Mia. My parents sat in the living room, alternating between anger and worry. Mom kept glancing at her phone, willing it to ring. Dad paced the floor, muttering about how they should have handled things differently. I didn't know about the incident until the next morning when Mom called me, her voice strained and weary. "Mia's in jail," she said bluntly. "What?" I asked, the word catching in my throat. "She was arrested last night for shoplifting," Mom continued, her voice trembling. "We got a call from the police. She tried to steal a bunch of makeup and jewelry from a department store. They said she got aggressive when they caught her." I wasn't sure how to respond. Mia's behavior had always been manipulative, but this felt like a new low. "Is she okay?" I asked finally, more out of habit than genuine concern. "They're holding her until we post bail," Mom said. "Your dad's already gone to deal with it." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to ask why they were bailing her out at all, why they couldn't let her face the consequences for once. But another part of me couldn't help but feel sorry for them. This was the golden child they'd spent years idolizing, the one they'd bent over backward to protect. And now she was sitting in a jail cell. When I visited my parents later that day, the house felt different. The air was heavy with regret and sorrow, as if the weight of Mia's actions had finally caught up to them. Dad was sitting in his recliner, staring blankly at the TV, while Mom sat at the dining table, her head in her hands. "We should have seen this coming," Dad said quietly when I walked in. "We let her get away with too much for too long." For the first time, Mom didn't rush to Mia's defense. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face. "We thought we were helping her," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We thought if we loved her enough, she'd turn out okay. But we were wrong." I didn't know what to say. This was what I'd wanted for years, for them to finally see the truth about Mia. But now that it was happening, it didn't feel good. It didn't feel like vindication. It just felt sad. The golden child they'd built their lives around had let them down in the worst way, and they were left trying to piece together where it all went wrong. "She needs help," I said finally. "Real help. You can't keep bailing her out, literally or figuratively. She's not going to change unless you make her face the consequences." Dad nodded slowly, but Mom didn't respond. She just kept staring at her hands, as if the answers were hidden somewhere in her palm lines. The family I'd always felt excluded from was now falling apart, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to fix it or let it crumble. A few days after Mia's arrest, my parents called me and asked me to come over for dinner. The request wasn't unusual. Family dinners were their way of keeping the illusion of normalcy alive, but I hesitated. After everything that had happened, the thought of sitting across the table from them felt exhausting. Still, curiosity got the better of me. Maybe they'd finally started to understand the damage Mia had caused. When I arrived, the atmosphere was different. Instead of the usual forced cheerfulness, the house was quiet, almost somber. Mom was in the kitchen, setting the table, and Dad was already seated, staring into his coffee mug like it held the answers to the universe. I sat down, bracing myself for another round of excuses, but what came next caught me completely off guard. "We owe you an apology," Dad said, his voice breaking slightly as he looked up at me. The words hung in the air, so unexpected that I wasn't sure I'd heard him correctly. "What?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Dad sighed and ran a hand through his thinning hair. "We've been unfair to you," he admitted. "For years. And we didn't see it, not really until now." Mom sat down beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes were red and puffy, as if she'd been crying all day. "We thought we were protecting Mia," she said, her voice trembling. "After everything we went through to have her, we felt like we had to shield her from the world. But in doing that, we neglected you. And we enabled her." I stared at them, unsure of what to say. For so long, I dreamed of this moment, of them finally admitting the truth about their favoritism. But now that it was happening, it felt surreal, almost hollow. I wanted to believe their words, to accept their apology, but the years of resentment were hard to shake. Mom continued, her voice thick with regret. "We let her get away with things we shouldn't have. We ignored the way she treated you because it was easier to tell ourselves it was just sibling rivalry. But it wasn't. We see that now. And we're so sorry." Dad nodded, his eyes glistening. "We thought we were helping her by giving her everything, by excusing her behavior. But all we did was hurt her and you. We failed both of you." Their apology felt like a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was validation, proof that I hadn't imagined the favoritism, that my feelings were real and justified. But on the other hand, it reopened old wounds I wasn't sure I was ready to face. The years of being overlooked, dismissed, and blamed couldn't be erased with a few heartfelt words, no matter how sincere they were. "I appreciate what you're saying," I said carefully, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "But it doesn't undo the damage. I spent so many years feeling like I didn't matter, like I was invisible in this family. And now you're telling me you see it? After everything?" Mom's tears spilled over, and she nodded. "We know it's not enough," she said. "We can't undo the past, but we want to make things right." I looked at them, at their tired faces and broken expressions, and realized they weren't just apologizing. They were grieving. Grieving the family they thought they'd built, the one Mia's behavior had shattered. It didn't erase the pain, but it felt like the first real step toward healing. "I'm willing to try," I said finally, my voice softer now. "But it's going to take time. You have to understand that." Dad reached across the table and squeezed my hand, his grip firm but shaky. "We'll do whatever it takes," he said. "We just want a chance to fix this." The apology didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the years of pain or the deep scars left by their favoritism. But it was a start, a fragile, tentative step toward mending a relationship I'd thought was broken beyond repair. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Since the night of the apology, things between me and my parents have been complicated. It's not the overnight transformation that some people might hope for, but a slow, awkward process filled with small steps forward and occasional missteps. My parents have been trying harder. They call more often, ask about my life, and actually listen when I speak. But rebuilding trust isn't easy. The scars from years of favoritism and neglect run deep, and I've found myself hesitating every time I start to let my guard down. The change in their behavior is tangible, though. Dad, who used to gloss over my achievements, now makes an effort to acknowledge them. He called last week just to say how proud he was of a promotion I'd recently gotten at work. It was such a small gesture, but it felt monumental coming from him. Mom has been more emotional, often apologizing in quiet moments and reminding me that she wants to do better. Sometimes it's overwhelming. I can tell they're trying, but part of me still wonders if it's too late. Mia remains the elephant in the room. She's finally agreed to seek professional help, though it took a lot of convincing from my parents. She's been seeing a therapist for a few weeks now, and while I don't have a full picture, Mom occasionally updates me on her progress. "She's opening up," Mom said during one of our phone calls. "It's going to take time, but I think she's starting to see the consequences of her actions." I haven't spoken to Mia directly since the arrest, and honestly, I'm not sure if I want to. Part of me feels sorry for her. She's clearly struggling, and the pedestal our parents put her on for so many years did more harm than good. But another part of me can't forget the years of hurt, the manipulations, the way she thrived on making me feel small. Every time I think about reaching out, I hear her voice in my head, mocking me or smirking as she got away with yet another lie. Mom asked me once if I'd be willing to talk to Mia, to try to help her as she navigates therapy. "You don't have to forgive her right away," she said gently. "But I think it would mean a lot if she knew you were open to it." "I don't know if I'm there yet," I replied honestly. "She's caused so much damage, Mom. It's not just about forgiveness, it's about trust. And I don't think I can trust her right now." Mom seemed to understand, but the conversation left me feeling conflicted. I've spent so long resenting Mia and the hold she's had over our family that I'm not sure I even know how to have a normal relationship with her. Still, there's a small part of me that wonders if there's anything left to salvage, if Mia and I could ever be sisters in the way I once hoped we'd be. For now, I'm focusing on myself and my relationship with my parents. It feels strange to have their attention after years of being overlooked, and I'm still trying to adjust to this new dynamic. There are moments when I catch myself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for them to slip back into old habits. But so far, they've stayed consistent in their efforts, and I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. It's bittersweet, though. Even as we move forward, the damage Mia caused will always linger. There are memories I can't erase, moments that shaped who I am in ways I'm still unpacking. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like there's hope for healing, not just for me, but for all of us. It's not perfect and it never will be, but maybe that's okay. Sometimes progress is messy. And sometimes messy progress is all you need. Mia's journey through therapy has been anything but smooth. At first, she resisted the idea altogether, insisting she didn't need help and that everyone else was overreacting. "I'm not some crazy person," she said during one of her outbursts, according to Mom. "You're the ones with the problem, not me." But my parents didn't budge this time. They told her that if she wanted their support moving forward, therapy wasn't optional. Reluctantly, Meow agreed. The updates from Mom have been sporadic, but insightful. "She's opening up little by little," Mom told me during one of our calls. "Her therapist says it's going to take time for her to unlearn some of her behaviors." I wanted to ask what that even meant, but I decided to let it go. Knowing Mia, her unlearning probably looked a lot like deflecting blame and avoiding accountability. To Mia's credit, though, there have been a few genuine attempts to reach out to me. She sent me a couple of texts over the past few months, each one carefully worded. The first one was short and awkward. "Hey, I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're doing okay." I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. The second one came weeks later, more detailed and a little vulnerable. "I know I've hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I'm trying to be better, and I just wanted you to know that." I've spent hours staring at those messages, debating whether to reply. Part of me wants to believe she's sincere, that therapy is actually helping her see the harm she's caused. But the other part of me, the part that remembers every smirk, every lie, every time she got away with something at my expense, can't help but doubt her intentions. Trust doesn't come easily anymore, especially not with Mia. My parents, however, have started setting boundaries with her, something I never thought I'd see. They've stopped indulging her excuses and have made it clear that her behavior will no longer be tolerated. When she lashed out at them a few weeks ago for not bailing her out of a late-night dispute with a friend, Mom stood her ground. "You need to learn to handle these things on your own," she told Mia. "We're here to support you, but we're not going to enable you." It hasn't been easy for them. Years of treating Mia like she could do no wrong have left them with deeply ingrained habits, and I can tell it's a struggle for them to break away from those patterns. But they're trying, and that means something. For the first time, they're starting to see Mia as she really is, not as the golden child, but as a person with flaws and responsibilities. Still, it's too soon to say if Mia will truly change. Therapy seems to be helping, but the road ahead is long, and I'm not sure she has the patience or the willingness to stick with it. The fact that she's reached out to me at all is a step in the right direction, but it's going to take more than a few texts to rebuild what she's broken. As for my parents, their newfound resolve has been encouraging. They've admitted that they have their own healing to do, not just as parents but as people who allowed their biases to shape our family in ways that hurt us all. Watching them set boundaries with Mia and hold her accountable has been bittersweet. On one hand, it's what I've always wanted. On the other, I can't help but wonder why it took so long, and whether it would have made a difference if they'd started sooner. For now, I'm keeping my distance from Mia, letting her do the work on her own. It's not out of spite, it's self-preservation. I need to protect the progress I've made and the fragile relationship I'm rebuilding with my parents. Maybe one day, I'll be ready to let Mia back into my life. But for now, I'm content to watch from a distance and hope that she's finally learning what it means to take responsibility. Now, I find myself in a strange in-between place, caught between hope and caution, progress and lingering doubt. My parents and I are closer than we've been in years. We talk more openly, sharing things that used to feel impossible to discuss. Dad is quick to express pride in my achievements, and Mom no longer brushes aside my feelings or excuses Mia's behavior. It's refreshing but also unfamiliar, and there's still a part of me that wonders if this new normal will ever truly feel normal. The scars of the past haven't disappeared. I catch myself hesitating before opening up to them, a reflex born from years of feeling ignored. But slowly, I'm learning to let my guard down. I've seen the effort they're making, not just in how they treat me, but in how they're handling Mia. It's clear they're trying to undo years of harmful patterns, even if it's uncomfortable for them. Mom told me recently, we've made so many mistakes, and we're going to make more. But we're not giving up on doing better. Her voice cracked as she said it, and for the first time in a long time, I believed her. As for Mia, she remains a question mark in my life. I'm still waiting to see if she'll truly take responsibility for everything she's done. Therapy seems to be helping her confront some of her issues, but it's hard to tell how much of it is genuine growth and how much is performative. She's reached out a few more times, each message a little more heartfelt than the last, but I've kept my responses short and guarded. It's not that I don't want to rebuild our relationship. It's that I'm not ready. Forgiveness is one thing, but trust is another. Rebuilding trust takes time, and Mia hasn't earned it yet. Part of me wonders if she ever will. I don't say this out of bitterness, but out of a need to protect myself. For years, I allowed her manipulations to hurt me because I believed my family wouldn't see the truth. Now that they finally do, I'm not willing to risk reopening old wounds just to satisfy a sense of obligation. Still, there's a part of me that hopes that one day Mia and I can have the kind of relationship I used to dream of when we were kids. That we can move past the resentment and pain and find a way to connect as sisters. It's a fragile hope, but it's there. This journey has been painful, but it's also been eye-opening. I've learned more about myself in these past months than I ever thought possible. I've learned how deeply favoritism and denial can cut, how they can fracture a family and leave lasting scars. But I've also learned that it's never too late to try to make things right. My parents' willingness to confront their mistakes has shown me that change is possible, even if it's slow and messy. Moving forward, I'm focusing on my own healing. I'm allowing myself to set boundaries, to prioritize my mental health, and to define my place in the family on my own terms. It's not a perfect journey, but it's mine, and for the first time, I feel like I have some control over it. Maybe one day, things will feel normal again. Maybe they won't. Either way, I know I'm stronger now, and that gives me hope for whatever comes next.